It is hard to believe that we are already at video number 5 in my series on why people stay in dysfunction, why people stay stuck in some sort of dysfunctional life situation that they've gotten themselves to. Could be a romantic relationship, could be a family dynamic, could be some sort of miserable work situation, or maybe a negative behavioral rut that you've gotten stuck in and you can't get out of. This is actually very common that people at some point in their life get stuck in some sort of dysfunctional dynamic. And that is what this whole video series is meant to help with. Now, in the last video, what we reviewed are the feelings, the most common feelings that go along with someone being stuck in a dysfunctional situation. And before we looked at the 7 feelings that go along with dysfunction, we looked at 5 different roles that people play. If a person has gotten stuck in dysfunction, odds are they have gotten stuck playing one of these 5 different roles that I reviewed in the video before that. Here's what's important. Each video in this series builds on the last one. And if you get each video, what you're going to get is a very broad, comprehensive understanding of all the psychological factors that can go into a person getting stuck in dysfunction. Why? Because if you gain insight, then that builds the foundation for you to think about, well, maybe do I want to change some of my behaviors? The insight, though, a lot of times is helpful to come first. That is the building block that you can really use, okay? So in this video today, we are talking about some of the fears, some of the things a person can be afraid of, can be truly afraid of, that can keep them stuck in whatever dysfunctional situation they're in. Now, if you take somebody and they're stuck in dysfunction, there are some fears at work. Now, we're not always aware of the fears that we have. Sometimes fears can be unconscious, meaning our ego won't let them come into full awareness. Why? Because it's too upsetting. Our ego really feels like it can't handle it, so it wants to protect us from seeing what is really honest and true sometimes. But the truth is that there is fear at work in dysfunction, okay? Now, I'm going to take you through 7 common things that people are afraid of if they have gotten stuck in a dysfunctional situation. And the first one is this one: fear that you may be destined to be unhappy, almost as if it's like a curse. Being afraid that for whatever reason, although it may not make sense, you are just destined to be unhappy, that there's really nothing that can be done about it. It is somehow woven into the fabric of your future, of your destiny. Fear that you're somehow destined to be unhappy is actually very common. And if this is a fear that you have, please don't feel like you're alone. Don't feel like this is just something that you are stuck with and that everybody else looks or seems to be so much happier and has such a happier future ahead of them. No, actually, this fear is really quite common. I can tell you from 20 years of experience as a psychologist. Next one, fear of uncertainty. When you're stuck in dysfunction and you think about the idea of making a change, changes can be incredibly scary. But part of what can make change so scary is that you don't yet have proof when you embark on change. You don't yet have proof of what things will look like in the new situation, what things will look like in the future. And what our brains can sometimes do is fill in the blanks. When they take that uncertainty, our brains can fill in the blanks in negative ways, and they can maybe tell us thoughts and things like, it could be worse. Things might be even scarier when you make those changes. Our brains can tell us, don't try to make any changes. That's really not good for us, but sometimes those are some of the extra sort of ancillary fears and thoughts that we can have that ride along with this fear of uncertainty. The next fear, fear of confrontation or conflict. So when people have gotten stuck in dysfunction, this becomes sort of the new normal. They get used to the dysfunction around them. It becomes familiar. It becomes known. And so the idea of trying to make a change, well, sometimes people are afraid, if I start to do that, won't that cause problems? People start thinking, well, wait a minute, if I start to make changes, if I try to get out of this situation or make changes to it, might there be some people around me that might get upset, that might not like it, and that might lead to confrontation? And a lot of times, people really don't like confrontation. While confrontation could be a very normal adult thing, that involves conversation and collaboration and problem solving. Well, for a lot of people who are uncomfortable with confrontation or assertiveness, the idea of confronting situations and topics like that, change, that's really difficult, can be really, really, really scary. And so some of these people may want to avoid it at all costs, even though avoiding it isn't good for them in the long run. The next fear is fear of losing your identity if you make a change. Because, see, once people have gotten stuck in dysfunctional dynamics, it has also become a part of their identity, why they stay. And so the idea of making a change, people are smart enough to know if they make a change, it's going to change their role, it's going to change their identity. And that can be kind of scary because, well, our identity is kind of like the internal clothing that we wear. So it's kind of like thinking, well, wait a minute, if I change who I am, well, what will I have then? Now, that's the feeling. It doesn't make it rational, but it's important to understand that that is the fear. That is a lot of times what the person is afraid of that keeps them stuck in dysfunction. And the question for you is that something you're afraid of? If you're stuck in some sort of dysfunction now, think about that for yourself. It could be this one, or maybe one of the other ones that I've talked about already. The next fear, fear of failure. This is one we're not going to spend a lot of time on because it is really self explanatory and it's also so raw and primitive and real. We all know that on just a human understanding, on a very common sense level, we all know that if we are stuck in a dysfunctional situation and we go out on a limb and we really try our best to try to change it and it doesn't work, the feeling can be like, well, then what? Then what? People can wonder, well, then does that mean there's no hope at all? The one hope that sometimes deep down people cling to is that maybe one day things could get better. Well, if you think about it, if you actually do the work and put yourself out there and try to change, and you end up feeling unhappy and scared and stressed, this is the thinking. Well, then a lot of times people will tell themselves, then maybe it's not worth me even trying to change because if I fail, then I won't have hope. This again is some of the thinking, but we need to remember that just because it's thinking or just because it's feelings doesn't necessarily mean that it's a fact or even rational. They're feelings. Next up, fear, and get ready for this one because some of you may have already been waiting for this one to come. Why people get stuck in dysfunction and have a hard time changing and getting out of it. Fear of being alone. Fear of being alone. Now, again, remember I said sometimes the fears that we have we're aware of, and sometimes the fears that we have are unconscious. We are not really aware of them. So maybe a person who does have the fear of being alone, if you ask them, hey, do you think maybe you're afraid of being alone? And they say, no, maybe that's true. Or maybe they do have that fear, but they are not yet aware of it. Or another way of thinking about it is they are not yet ready to admit it to themselves. Not even just you, they are not yet even ready to admit it to themselves. That is how scary, how intense that fear can be. Sometimes some of the things that we're most afraid of, we are clinging to something for dear life, not wanting to let go of something. So yeah, when sometimes the feelings are that intense and that strong, sometimes we are not fully aware of just how much we might be afraid of something. But one good question to ask yourself about fear of being alone is this one. Have you been alone for a significant period of time in your life? Or have you not really been alone? If we're talking about relationships, for example, have you been single for a significant part of your adult life or not? If we're talking about living with people, have you ever lived alone truly and learned to be okay being alone in that way? Those are just some examples, some questions that you can ask yourself. Is it possible that I might be really afraid of being alone? If you do have this fear, I want you to know that you're human. None of these fears are bad, or there's nothing wrong with you for having these fears. The only thing that I would suggest is bad is maybe really just continuing to try to avoid and block out some of the feelings that you may have, as opposed to just saying, I want to confront how I feel. I want to be honest about how I feel, and I will do what I need to do to learn how to cope with the intensity of it. Okay. And the last fear that I want to go over is, I think, probably the most important one of all, because it is such a psychologically complex fear. But I think after I share it, you'll probably understand what I mean. One of the fears that keeps people stuck in dysfunction is this one: fear that if they start being honest about how they really feel, that everything in their life might start one by one to fall apart. Fear that by making one change in this dysfunctional situation, it could open up Pandora's box, so to speak, and everything that they know and hold to be true and care about, that everything could start to unravel and fall apart. Like a house of cards, just cascading and falling. That is often a fear of why some people are afraid to make a change and to try to get out of a dysfunctional dynamic. Fear that by making one change, there could be a domino effect. Fear that everything could ultimately fall apart in the end. And again, it is a fear. Our brains can manufacture some of the most intense fears. Our brains are very powerful things. And when our brains come up with fears like that, it's important to remember, wait a minute. Let me, like cognitive behavior therapy reminds us, let me check the evidence. Let me look for what I know is real and true. Let me poll some friends who have a good level head and who have a good hold on reality, and maybe run some questions by them and get their opinion when some of my fears start to get the best of me. Let me maybe start therapy and talk to a mental health professional. Let me get a good anxiety workbook, for example, that I can work with and that can help me through these situations. Those are some examples of some solutions. We'll talk further on into the video series about solutions more in depth. But in this video, I just wanted to talk to you about some of these fears, some of these very powerful fears that can keep people stuck in dysfunction. Now, before I close today, I just want to do a reminder. As I said, each of these videos is building on each other. This is video number 5. Now, some of you may have noticed, because you are good psychological detectives, some of you may have noticed that actually when we talked about the fears, that fears are actually interesting because sometimes the fears are related to what? Can you think? If somebody has a fear about something, it can also be related to a belief that they have. So fears are kind of complex because they're kind of like a mix of feelings, but also after a while of being afraid of something, it can get locked into an actual belief. So one of the things we're going to do, because like I said, each video is building on the last one, we are now ready to talk about beliefs in the next video. Some of the beliefs that people can have about themselves, about their situations, and even the people around them. We're going to start to talk about those beliefs, okay? Now, just one final point that I want to make. If you haven't seen video number 2 in this series, video number 2, I think, is especially important because in that video, that's when I explain the psychological process that happens when somebody gets stuck in dysfunction, how it doesn't just happen overnight. It's not a one-time thing. It's really important if you really want to understand the dysfunction that you may be stuck in and why you may be staying in it. It's really important that you understand the actual psychological process that I discuss in video number 2. It will be extremely helpful as you build this foundation of insight. Okay? All right. See you next time, everybody. Have a good one.